who would you say what Jordan Peterson is doing in history? Who would you have been in the 16th or whatever century we go to? Who is Jordan Peterson? Like, if you were to give a 100 years from now, what are people going to say who Jordan Peterson was? They're not going to say, oh, he was a professor. Oh, he was a clinical psychologist. Oh, he was an author. I don't think they're going to say that. What do you think people are going to correlate you to 100 years from now?
I really have no idea.
So let's just say, is it like a philosopher, Plato? Would you say you're more of a philosopher? Would you say you're more like an Aristotle? Do you see yourself more as that? Do you see yourself as, look, I'm just somebody that's sharing my thoughts and my life experiences, and it's impacting people's lives?
I think I'm a clinical psychologist.
Okay, so that's kind of how you see yourself.
Yeah.
Okay.
And there's a lineage of great clinical psychologists. I'm not saying that I'm in that lineage, but I would say that people who are the most similar to me are people like, well, Carl Rogers might be an example.
Okay.
I mean, he didn't have the same social media platform,
Sure.
but of course no one did. But that's how I see myself intellectually, really as a psychologist, as a clinical psychologist.
Okay.
And I think that the work I'm doing on my lecture tour is a hybrid of being a professor and being a clinical psychologist.
But is it fair to say that's who you were, but you've evolved into something way bigger than just being a clinical psychologist? I think that's what Pat's kind of getting at. I mean, he's comparing you to an Aristotle of some capacity.
Yeah, well, I don't know, because my focus is still on the individual, even when I'm lecturing in front of large audiences. And I don't exactly lecture. I explore ideas in front of audiences, which is what Rogan does. And I do that even when it's a monologue. You know, and you think, well, how can you be exploring ideas with the audience when it's a monologue? And the answer is, well, you're attending to the audience. You're watching them to see if they understand and if they're nodding and what they're responding to. Like, there's a dynamism about it, but it's all focused on the individual. And there's been some unbelievably influential clinical psychologists or psychiatrists. I mean, Freud was unbelievably influential, and so was Carl Jung, and there's a half dozen of them or so. And so I see that I'm in that tradition. Now, the fact that this information now can be disseminated in audio form and video form makes the playing field radically different. And so I was also a very early adopter of those technologies. So when I blew up, let's say, it happened overnight. It's not exactly, like, because most of these things don't happen exactly overnight.
It takes 20 years to blow up.
I get that concept. The first doublings are invisible, right?
Yeah, but that live outside of the university.
Yeah, well,
that's listen, everybody's like, who is this guy?
Yeah.
He's right. He makes sense. So that was a concept of.
Sure, there was a tipping point there. That was when there was a free speech rally outside my office at the University of Toronto. It wasn't organized by me, but I was invited to speak, as was anyone who wanted to speak, by the way, at that event. And then a bunch of radical types tried to shut it down with white noise, and they were very annoying. And some of them were clearly psychopathic. Some of the people, I watched them because I have a pretty good eye for that. And some of the men that came out, they were bad actors. In any case, I got shanghaied on the way back into my office by these hypothetically trans activists, mostly young people.
What do you mean shanghaied?
Well, they just surrounded me.
Got it.
You know, that's all I mean.
Ganged up on.
Well, kind of. They were disrespectful, which I wasn't very thrilled about, because I think that it's not a good students. If students are being disrespectful to professors, something's wrong. That's not what happens at a university. I had no tolerance for that in my classes. If you were out of line, you were more than welcome to leave now. And that didn't mean you couldn't challenge me intellectually. That was absolutely fine. If you had a smart question, you were paying attention. I didn't care what your opinion was, but you know, maybe when you're a junior high teacher or an elementary school teacher, you have to put up with misbehavior.
Not
As
college.
a professor, I put up with like zero misbehavior. No misbehavior. We're adults. We're not doing that at all.
Did you set the tone for that day one in the first class? Like, this is how I roll.
Yeah, I never had trouble with students in my classes. Well, a handful of students would pretty much always leave the first lecture I gave, particularly my personality class, because a lot of them didn't know who I was. In my smaller classes, people already knew who I was, so that never happened. But in my personality class, there'd always be 6 or 7 people in the first lecture who'd make a show of leaving. And it was because of the tone I set, which was, don't muck about in this class at all. You're here to listen or not. You can leave if you don't want to listen, but this is a serious endeavor. In any case, these students surrounded me, and they filmed it, and then they put it online. And the object was to discredit me, but that didn't work. But the reason it didn't work, in part, and this is why this wasn't only overnight, was I already had 100 hours of lectures on YouTube. And I basically recorded everything I ever said to students in any professional capacity. And what I said in my classes was exactly the same as what I said when I wasn't in my classes. So there's no show there. And so people came to look to see what was going on. They came to my YouTube channel. And it had like 35,000, 50,000 subscribers at that point, which wasn't none, especially that early on in YouTube development. And they found out that what I was saying was not only completely unlike what I was accused of saying, but it was exactly the opposite, partly because, I was accused of being this radical right-wing figure. And I'd lectured about the evils of National Socialism at Harvard and at the University of Toronto for like 20 years. So the idea that I was somehow radically right-wing was not only a lie. There's lies where you bend the truth, right? That's one kind of lie.
I think what those lectures did is a way for people to not be able to taint your name by saying, I actually like what this guy has to say. So if you enjoyed this little short segment from the podcast that we did, here's another short segment to watch. Or if you want to see the entire podcast, click over here. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.